Hi, everybody. Welcome to Viewpoint, a production of the U.S. at Work Network. We are honored to have two guests today on Viewpoint. We have Tim Nelson and Billie Flynn. Tim is a brilliant thinker, and he has guided and coached CEOs and presidents of the largest automotive component suppliers in the world, Delphi. He has also worked with engineers at Lockheed Martin to help them solve problems that their entire engineering teams could not approach. Here to share how Tim's ideas were used to save Lockheed Martin invaluable time, lots of money, is our second guest, Billie Flynn. Billie spent his career with Lockheed Martin and knows Tim's work and his genius firsthand. And Billie can talk a little about the F-35 program and his work with that. Billie, welcome. Tim, welcome to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Billie, can you just share your background with Lockheed Martin?
Well, sure. Thanks, Fred. First, I spent a career as a fighter pilot and test pilot and combat commander with the Canadian Air Force. I then went on to become a civilian test pilot testing military aircraft and spent many, many years at Lockheed Martin, finishing as a senior F-35 test pilot. It allowed me an insight into the world of engineering, and that's how Tim and I came to be close colleagues and friends. We were both nominated as fellows of the company, and a fellow is an expert in their particular field. Less than 1% of the population of the entire engineering world. Tim and I were both fellows together.
Congratulations, quite a singular honor. Tim, you have a unique and engaging story. And you have a bunch of patents. We're not going to talk about all those, but I think it's something like my fingers and toes in number. I'm not really sure. So welcome to Viewpoint. And Tim, would you share a brief overview of your career history, please, for our audience?
So I have 26,600 hours, actually more than that now, using a methodology called REDX to solve the unsolvable. And as you mentioned before, I worked at Delphi. Just to give you a sense of size, they had 171 plants, 190,000 employees, 42 technical centers, and 34 joint ventures. And then I moved from Delphi Automotive into aerospace, and because my skills are transferable, at Lockheed Martin on the F-35 program, we were able to solve 65 problems, save actually more than $1 billion. I was part of that contribution, and we certified 84 engineers just on the F-35 alone.
Tim, off camera, you and I were talking, and you had a very interesting analogy, and I'd like you to share that with the audience, would you?
I'm often compared to a child prodigy playing the violin, and as far as other skills, I have to rely on others to help me. And I'm very creative, but I need logical people working with me, like Fred and like Billie.
You call this creative logic, right, Tim? And
yes,
can you tell me just a little more about that?
Well, I was fortunate enough to work with the chief statistician for General Electric who did the math behind the atom bomb. And I drew a picture, and he created the math, and it became a patent. And he actually knew Einstein. And I was the creative part. He was the logical part. So I found that when we put creativity that comes from me coaching teams, I bring the creativity to the teams, and I have support around me to bring the logic.
Billie, how did the two of you meet? How'd your paths cross?
I created and flew the first ever public demonstration of the F-35 fighter. 10 years after it had flown, I took it to the Paris Air Show. And I created this air show start to finish. And when I briefed my colleagues, the technical fellows, Tim and the group of us that are the experts, Tim realized that how I had created that air show was along his way of thinking. And the way I did this was not from takeoff to landing, but in fact, from landing backwards all the way through the routine to takeoff. I built the air show backwards, not forwards. And the term that Tim coined is called ambidextrous thinking, thinking logically through start to finish, but also going backwards, thinking back to front. And it's really the connection that brought my world, my logical world, but the creative element of that to a world where Tim lives, which is the creative logic world.
So when you were doing your presentation, Billy, you approached it backwards, and that Tim recognized that. Is that what we're saying here? Is that the two of you kind of met in the middle? Your logic approaches?
Absolutely, we really did. Look, I had a problem. I had a big problem. We had $1 trillion development program, a fighter jet worth more than $100 million, and I could not risk crashing that airplane in front of the biggest audience in the world. And so for me, I was worried about an accident and the risks of that. And so I, in a preventative sense, I built everything backwards so that I could never be boxed in the airplane. Tim looked at that and said, how can this guy think backwards like I do? And that's how we came together. And from that point on, we were able to work on in some fun projects at Lockheed Martin where that mindset, that creative logic, that ambidextrous thinking theme really came into play.
Tim, off camera, you were telling me about a very personal incident in which concerning your son, who was a ranger. Would you just share that very quickly with the audience?
Well, I passed Billy in the hallway, and I asked, would he write my son, who'd just become a ranger, an encouraging note? And he was willing to do that, and that brought our relationship even closer together.
The program, the F-35 program, was, I believe, the first encounter the two of you had with each other, and kind of brought you together for a collaborative work solution. Billy, can you talk a little about the collaborative work solution?
Sure. On the initial tests of each airplane, we basically ring the brand new fighter out. And I had encountered a phenomena where we had this peculiar hum in the aircraft as we climbed away on after our first takeoff, climbing up in the sky. And it forced us to abort the mission and come back and land. And this happened on a couple occasions. And we couldn't seem to get to the end solution to what was going on. And the logical engineering processes were not helping us. And here we were stumbling along with these multi-million-dollar airplanes, not being able to safely fly them and clear the flight test. And that's how Tim and I came together on this particular unique engineering problem we called it the hum, and tried to solve it together.
Did you solve it?
Yes, we solved it together. And Billy was the communication link to all the pilots to tell them what was going on as we did the investigation.
So Fred, the unique part of this is that in the really robust engineering processes, that the linear processes that our company had, we couldn't find the solution and we couldn't rectify the problem. And it was ultimately costing us money and time, big money and lots of time, which we didn't have. And the one mind that figured out the problem in this ambidextrous theme, this creative logic way of thinking, was Tim's way of approaching the problem. And it's ultimately Tim that solved the issue.
That must have been a shock. Tim, Billy, it must have been a shock for the engineers who had spent all these hours and hours on trying to figure out what it was. And you and Billy get together. There it is, a solution. It must be an amazing event for engineers sitting there listening to how this thing was solved.
I've never failed to solve a problem, Fred. And I bring the creative thinking to the team. And in terms of that creative thinking to the team, I've got to get credit to executive sponsors who remove any roadblocks that get in the way, and subject matter experts, because I can't be a subject matter expert on cars and processes associated with cars and on jets as well. So Billy overstated a little bit what I do. I'm the coach, and I coach the team in the creative part, but it's generally Billy that's going to get the answer.
Well, I know you closed a lot of projects and you closed a lot of dollars and saved Lockheed a lot of money. Tim, in off camera, you and I were talking, and we were talking about dyslexia. And you offered it to me a concept, it's a gift. And I had never thought about it being a gift before. And the more you and I communicated together, the more I saw the reality of what you were saying. You're a dyslexic. So I know that makes it communication difficult. It makes it difficult for people who are not in the norm of understanding what dyslexia is. Would you share with our audience, Tim, some of the benefits to organizations of leveraging the gifts of dyslexia?
Well, before I leverage the gift, I'll talk about the stigmas. And the stigmas are things like not being able to comprehend what you read. And when you address a stigma, you address one issue at a time. Think of a gift as being like a gifted athlete, and think about their skill being a great quarterback. Well, a gifted athlete can have many skills. So it's a much better paradigm to address things based on skills and gifts as opposed to one thing at a time. But for example, my mom was an English teacher and my dad was a coach, and I wasn't good at either one. They wanted me to be like all the other kids, but I couldn't. And most people want you to conform, and I could not conform. So I discovered gifts over time and went actually from F's to A's in school, using what I call creating an ingenious compensation strategy. And those ingenious compensation strategies are how I learned to go from an ordinary engineer to an extraordinary engineer. But I had to have extraordinary engineers around me with the logical mindset in order to do it.
I'm still thinking about one of the conversation pieces, Tim, that you and I had, and Billy, you're more than welcome to kick in on this one. Something about the butterfly and the caterpillar. Tim, would you share that with? I really have to think.
Yeah, that's quite easy, Fred. I did not know how I come up with compensation skills. What I've been doing as I come up with a compensation skill, I've been putting it in a form of standard work where I can teach it to other people and they can use it whether they're dyslexic or not. In terms of trying to figure out the metamorphosis that goes on in my head, I think about what goes on in the cocoon. And in terms of the cocoon, it's the death of the caterpillar, but the birth of the butterfly. And the butterfly allows us to soar.
One of the issues that's really hard for organizations is to manage the vast population. And what is convenient for the human resources folks, or even for managers, is to have everyone the same. Everyone fits in the norm. It's easier to manage small, all the way to big organizations that way. It's difficult for many organizations to accept the people who are not like everyone else. They don't fit the norm, right? Whatever that size of that population is. And someone like Tim brings a gift that the norm does not possess. And it's really up to that organization to realize the potential of those unique individuals and to appreciate that they bring that much more to the chances of success to the projects of companies. It is the phenomena that's often used is called the tall poppy phenomena, the tall poppy syndrome. And that's where in a field of flowers, you would lop off all the high flowers, blooms, so that the entire field looks uniform. And someone like Tim is part of that tall poppy syndrome. It's more convenient for a big organization to lop them off and marginalize them than to accept their unique gifts and to accept that they live and operate outside the norm.
Billy, you have stated that managing skills versus managing diversity really requires accommodating people. And those who don't fit the standard mold sometimes get left behind. Could you talk a little about how you can utilize the integration of these to solve some of these very unsolvable problems?
Well, I think in organizations where you have big problems, that you're leading edge technologies where the standard population is able to manage and solve problems, I want those individuals with those unique skills, the gifted people that can solve the unsolvable problems. And they are potentially people that don't fit in the normal population, but they have that one insight, that one gift that allows us to solve something that the rest of the population doesn't. So that's why I come from the world that embraces diversity. I don't want the norm. I don't want the mass population. I want the special talents of unique individuals, because they're going to help us bust through the technologies that we just can't manage otherwise.
Billy, that makes a lot of sense. And Tim, I know that you and I were talking off camera about the tattoo, and I'd like you to talk to the folks a little about your explanation of the tattoo. I thought it was just excellent.
The main people that are supported are those that are associated with different genders, colors, and also their preference in terms of sexual preference. And in terms of that group, they've come out of the closet. In terms of the dyslexics, we stay hid within the closet, or afraid to come out because of rejection or fear of rejection. And a stigma, if you look it up in the dictionary, means a brand or tattoo. And you would not gender tattoo a black person, a woman, or someone that's gay, yet we continue to carry those stigmas with us.
Tim, I really learned something from you about your wonderful statement about dyslexia being a gift. I thought
Yes.
that was a real jewel.
Well, I'm writing a book on dyslexia being a gift. And at most, in terms of other authors, they'll list a few gifts, won't even define them. But I'm going to the next level, because if you don't have a skill associated with the gift isn't tangible. But once you have the gift and you have associated skills associated with that gift, you can accomplish very big things. And if you attack it from the stigma standpoint, at best, we're going to be average, because we're not going to be the best at reading, or the best directions, or best with memory. And that side of our brain just doesn't work as well.
Everybody, we have been interviewing with Billie Flynn and Tim Nelson, two fellows that got together at the Paris Air Show and discovered the gifts and solved some billion-dollar problems. So thanks, guys, for joining us today here on Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.